Phenology is the timing of life cycle events in nature. So for example, the timing of when plants flower and fruit, the timing of bird migration, insect emergence, or when leaves are changing colors on trees.
For us, we're especially interested in the timing of changing of plants through the season. When do plants flower? When do their leaves change color? This is important for being able to predict when things are going to happen.
Phenology not only is important for the species themselves, the phenology of one species will have important consequences for the species that they interact with.
And it's helpful for us to understand how this unfolds over the course of a year, as well as how these patterns change from year to year. We need to understand what's happened in the past so we might be able to anticipate what to expect in the future.
Phenological events are sensitive to environmental conditions like temperature, and climate change, characterized by warming temperatures and extreme weather events, can impact the timing of important life cycle events.
For example, the flowering date of plants will also have important consequences for pollinators. If the plants flower early, then the pollinators couldn't keep up with that, then both will suffer.
This can have cascading effects for ecosystems, and it can also impact the ecosystem services that people benefit from. As people, we are part of the ecosystems that surround us, and the things that we do impact ecosystems, and then ecosystems impact us. So if phenology shifts, that can have impacts on people. For example, it can impact our food and when we get the fruits and vegetables that we like to eat. It can have impacts on allergies and when certain plants that we're allergic to are producing pollen. Because phenology is so important for us in our lives, it's critical that we track it. The study of phenology really started with indigenous peoples who closely paid attention to the seasonal patterns around them. And they passed down this knowledge, and still do, primarily through oral traditions. We also have written records of phenology dating back as early as the 9th century in Japan, where they recorded the timing of their annual cherry blossom festivals, and we have recordings of grape harvest dating back to the 15th century in Europe. So traditions of recording phenology have been carried forward over centuries by individual landowners and then government agencies, and more recently, these efforts have been expanded to regional and national scale citizen science efforts. So ideally, to understand how phenology is changing and what phenology baselines are, we want to have a global understanding of phenology at many scales. So we want phenology data in many different locations, across different environments, different taxa, and across time. But this is a challenging thing to do because it's hard to make a generalized framework for how phenology is changing when we have these big gaps in data. We have kind of three major gaps. The first is that different phenology monitoring programs exist across the world, except their data is challenging to standardize with each other, or they take different kinds of data, and so it's hard to use them in combination. The second problem is that we lack historical phenology data, and if we want to understand how phenology is changing across time, we need to have a marker for how it was in the past. And then the third problem is that we have a lot of spaces in the world where we don't have any phenology data, or we have very limited data.
Major goal of Phenobase is to build a global central database of plant phenology to overcome the spatial, temporal, and the species coverage limitations.
From monitoring programs, data from community-collected images on iNaturalist, and digitized herbarium specimen images.
iNaturalist makes it possible for you to share the photos and the sounds of the species you encounter. If you see a cool flower blooming in a park near you, you can take a picture of it, post it to iNaturalist, and even if you don't know what you saw, that's okay because other people in the community will help you identify what you saw. So by having millions of people contributing their observations from anywhere they are, we find that we're able to get a much more diverse snapshot of biodiversity and have that represent many more places. In iNaturalist, one of the things that you can do is you can add annotations. For example, is the plant flowering? Does it have fruits or seeds? Are the leaves colored? Does it have no leaves? There are millions of observations of flowering plants, and only, I think, still less than 10% of those flowering plant observations have an annotation from a human. So what we're able to do through Phenobase, train a model, and then that model goes and looks at the many other millions of records that haven't been annotated yet and makes predictions about what the phenological state is, and then makes that data available through Phenobase.
We are trying to use machine learning to actually extract this information, this like generate this new phenological data and get it ready to be used by others.
So we've got tens of thousands of people in the community who are adding annotations to iNaturalist observations, but we're able to scale that up even more to millions of records through Phenobase. And this way, it's unlocking tons more data.
We provide training data to the computer, showing it what a flower looks like and what an image without a flower looks like. And then the computer can then classify flowers and fruits in both iNaturalist images, which are community collected images, and herbarium specimens. An herbarium specimen is a plant that was collected in the field that is pressed and dried and then mounted on paper, and it has a label connected to it with information about when it was collected, where it was collected, and what it was nearby. On these sheets, we can see whether that specimen is in flower, whether it's in fruit, and so we have millions of herbarium specimens with this potential. We have the capacity to understand flowering and fruiting across time, but the problem is that it takes a lot of time for people to annotate and classify whether there are flowers and fruits. And so that's what Phenobase is trying to solve.
And with machine learning, we were just trying to processing these millions of images and get this information out so that we can integrating them into a central database, which is what essentially what Phenobase is going to do.
What's really cool about the way that we're using AI with iNaturalist and with Phenobase is that it's a very collaborative process. People in the community are sharing their observations, they're sharing their expertise, they're adding these annotations, and then they can see the results. They can see that more of the species from their area are able to be identified. They can see that there's more phenology data available in their part of the world now. iNaturalist is very complementary to some of the more conventional phenological studies. I think it's great that we have both. It's great that we have intensive studies, often years-long records of phenology in particular places. And then we've got millions of folks on iNaturalist who might only be making one record, but they might be making it in a place where there's not a lot of phenology data.
I think that many people from many different disciplines will be interested in our Phenobase data.
For example, researchers, obviously, we can use this data to understand at large spatial scale and unprecedented scales about how phenology have changed over the past decades, or how phenology will change in the future in response to global environmental change.
The thing that I think is really important to emphasize is that none of this with Phenobase would be possible without all of the different people that collected these observations and these different phenology data types.
It's really exciting and empowering, I think, when people realize that they can really make a difference by going outside, taking photos of the plants that they see, and sharing their expertise on iNaturalist.
We really want anyone who's interested in phenology data to have access to high-quality data they can trust. And we now have this global database of phenology information that has never existed before.
No one person can do this. It's really a global effort, and it's really exciting to be part of it.